GauessSoft TableTorch is an add-on for Google Sheets. In this video, we'll focus on the correlation matrix function of the TableTorch. Pearson correlation coefficient is the most commonly used measure of correlation. It represents the extent of linear covariance between two independent variables conveniently scaled to have a range of -1 to 1. That is quite easy to interpret in any given context. The greater is the value of the coefficient, the greater is the linear covariance between the two variables, meaning that as one increases, the other does so as well. Or, if the coefficient is negative, a case that is called an inverse correlation, then as one variable increases, the other decreases. For example, this synthetic dataset contains columns A and B with random data. We can use Google Sheets Correl function to calculate the Pearson correlation coefficient for these two columns. Its absolute value turns out to be quite small, and if you had many more rows, it is likely to eventually converge to 0. Let's add more columns. Let the column C be a multiple of A, and the column D be the sum of columns A and B. Now, we can calculate the correlation coefficients for columns A and B, A and C, A and D, B and C, B and D, and finally C and D. The correlation coefficient for A and B we already seen. For A and C, it is 1, because C has values that are pure multiples of A values. This is also the reason why B and C have the same correlation coefficient as A and B. It might be more interesting to look at the correlation coefficients for the D column, which could be rounded to about 0.73 for all the pairs, because D's formula is the sum of columns A and B, and thus D is correlated to both A and B to the same extent. What we have made is called a correlation matrix, a rather useful tool for quickly identifying possible relationships between the columns in a table. It might be relatively easy to type the Correl function correctly 6 times for 4 columns. However, if we look at a more realistic data sample, for 15 columns, one would need to enter the Correl function more than 100 times, which is not only tedious to do, but also increases the chances of making mistakes. Here is where TableTorch comes to the rescue. Let's launch it by clicking on its icon on the right side panel of Google Sheets. The link to instructions on how to install it is in the video's description. Select Arrange and click on the Correlation Matrix button. You can also exclude certain columns from the analysis if they are not of the interest, and you'll also be notified of the columns that could not be processed for this function. Click the Compute button. Give it a moment for processing, and TableTorch will create a colorful correlation matrix ready for analysis. You can also use it to discover the nonlinear relations by choosing the Spearman's rank correlation coefficient instead of Pearson. Click the Compute button and give it a moment as well. Remember, however, that a correlation does not necessarily imply causation. Thank you for using or considering using TableTorch. Please feel free to put down your thoughts in the comments below or contact us via tt.support@gauesssoft.com.